Hello, everyone. Welcome to Lecture 2 for History 1113, World Civ to 1500. The topic for Lecture 2 is Chapter 2, Early Human Societies. Today, we're going to talk about early human evolution and migration, people in the Paleolithic age, and then the Neolithic Revolution. So you're starting with early human evolution and migration. We will discuss the process of human evolution in a biological and anthropological context, explain how and why Paleolithic humans migrated, and describe the tools and technologies used in the Paleolithic age. I will post this link here in the um, textbook chapter. It's a little animation on people moving throughout the continents throughout the world. So I'll post that link there so that you can see it and not really bogged down in the video here with it. But human evolution, right? So we're talking to get a little sciencey a little bit for history, but we work together, right? This is how we understand our past. This is how we understand where we came from. And so we can trace our own evolution back to a very, 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 very distant ancestor to humans called Australopithecus, who lived in eastern and southern Africa between 2.5 and 4 million years ago. The species Afarensis was capable of walking upright and likely used tools. So they are the earliest proto-human that we can find in the world so far, but we're still looking. See if we can go back further. They had plenty of hair like chimpanzees, fingers and arms for climbing trees, and brains about 1/3 the size of ours. So they had much smaller brains, much more closer to monkeys than to humans, but we're on the track, right? This is a skeleton here on the left-hand side. Some of those most oldest fossils that we have discovered so far. Scholars have included the genus Homo, so human, evolved from Australopithecus somewhere around 2 to 3 million years ago. Following them, we have the earliest member of the genus Homo was Homo habilis. Habilis means handy. It was thought at one time that this was the first species to have created stone tools, but we know that that actually was earlier than them. Homo habilis has a larger brain, similar to ours, as well as small teeth and a face we might recognize as human if it had skin on it. There are 3D models out there that you can go look at and see. It's kind of eerie, a little bit uncanny valley. Um, but members of these species also had many ape-like characteristics. So long arms, hairy bodies, adult heights of only 3 to 4 feet. So again, on the train, getting closer and closer, right? Um, then finally, around 2 million years ago, we get Homo erectus here in the skeleton in East Africa. So the name erectus for upright. So this species lived entirely on the ground, walked and ran exclusively in an upright position. And because of that, their actual bodies, their interior organs, their internal structure changed from the weight and the gravity of being upright all of the time. So their digestive organs are pulled down lower into a smaller space, which also changes their diet. You don't have the big stomach, the big organs to digest those tough plants, right? And to like kind of keep that full for a long time because you're working on it for a long time. It's smaller, so it can't take as much food. So we start going towards easier to digest items like nuts, fruits, tubers, so potatoes, root vegetables, honey, and even meat, right? Things that are like easier to eat, but you have to eat more of, right? Around 2 million years ago, Homo erectus emerged in, oh, sorry, I started from the top. I don't know why I did that. I thought I was being crazy. Going all the way to the bottom, members of Homo erectus were about the same height as we are, sometimes reaching just over 6 feet. So just about as average humans today. They made and used relatively sophisticated stone tools. They used fire for warmth and cooking. They made huts out of wood and fur, and they worked together. This is our first kind of example of groups of these kind of working together for a common goal, just hunting and foraging. We also can tell that the position of the larynx or the voice box in the throat also suggests that they had some type of spoken language. So not just grunts and growls and kind of more animalistic noises, that they may have actually had words or something close to words to vocally communicate with each other. And Archaeologists have also uncovered strong evidence that Homo erectus cared for the sick and elderly in their groups as well, which is not something that you see very commonly with the earlier humans and with other animal species. Finally, at some point between 40,000 and 15,000 years ago, the diversity of human species declined and only Homo sapiens remained. We are Homo sapiens. The first and most commonly accepted theory of how Homo sapiens spread throughout the world is the out of Africa theory, which suggests that we first emerged in Africa about 200,000 years ago, and then 100,000 years after that, just started walking all over the place and ended up walking everywhere from Africa out to all the different parts of the land. Uh, there is another theory that suggests a multi-regional evolution, which basically says that Homo sapiens evolved from Homo erectus around the same time in several different areas of the world. There is kind of some theory, some evidences to back this theory up, but mostly it's a way to explain how we have such diverse human populations. That maybe it was a little bit more than just people walking around and living in places for thousands of years. But it primarily relies on the study of fossils and archaeological records rather than on the genetic data. So it's looking at where we're finding those fossils and how old those fossils are compared to if those fossils actually match people out of Africa, which is how kind of the Africa theory came to be in the first place. So human migration, there's two big rounds of human migration that coincide around the last ice age. And the first one is happening as early as 200,000 years ago, starts in southern Africa, eastern and southern Africa, and then people spread out from there. They are going to rely on frozen water from the ice age or cleared out water beds. So it's suddenly possible to walk what normally would be unnavigable because of the water. And so we're able to expand out southwest, north, and as far as the Mediterranean Sea, but kind of mostly staying on the African continent. Later, 100,000 years later, is when we get that full ice age. And that's when we're able to actually walk on now ice or dry land between the continents. And this is a period of our greatest migration, our greatest spread. And that video that I linked into the same page as the textbook it illustrates that. You can see it with all the arrows that are moving across the globe at this time. During this migration, we're going to move out of Africa and then end up in Asia and eventually places like North America and South America. And you can see here, we're generally starting here, traveling up and down this kind of middle coastland of southern and eastern Africa. And then eventually we'll start moving to other parts of Africa and then continue moving on to Europe, out into Asia, to the Middle East, to India, then to Asia. Some of us will break down and go to Australia and the islands. And some of us will go up and use this land bridge that connected modern day Russia and Alaska to get into North America, travel around, and then eventually get down into South America. So our early human lifestyles are mainly hunter-gatherer for a long period of time. This is a strategy of hunting animals and then gathering, foraging wild plants and fruits and nuts and seeds, rather than staying stationary and planting and harvesting agriculture. What this means is that any scarcity, anytime the animals run out, anytime the food can't find it, that it's going to force you to move to a new place where you can find food. So we're going to constantly be moving around. And so because of that, it's possible that you wouldn't really notice how far that you have moved over the course of your entire lifetime, right? Which kind of explains how we're able to walk and get across the globe, right? We're also using stone tools. The earliest known human-made stone tools are from 2.6 million years ago. So far earlier than our initial migration timeline. So that means we're pretty good at using these tools now. They're highly effective tools for killing animals, butchering meat, smashing bones, and all kinds of other tasks. You can see we have these are not necessarily arrowheads that you may be familiar with. These are more that would be used as you would just hold it in your hand and smash. You could use it as a knife if the sides are sharp, or you could wrap it to a to a stick, kind of use it as an axe. This one right here is going to be one that we'll actually use to break and shape the stones into these smaller pieces. And then these here are examples of some really, really, really thin stone flakes that are very, very, very sharp that you can use as knives. You can use to clean hides, so scrape the skin and the fat off of the hide, so that way you can use it for clothing and for bedding and for, hut making, things like that. Pretty advanced technology, all things considered, right? Now, these would take a while to build, to make, but they're very effective once you do make them. So people in the Paleolithic age. So we'll look at explaining how the environment shaped the way people lived in the Paleolithic age, describe the day-to-day life of people in the Paleolithic age, and discuss Paleolithic age peoples. Damn, say that 3 times fast. And their likely attitudes towards the environment, gender, religion, and social hierarchy. That one will be a lot more touched upon in the textbook reading, so make sure that you're getting that as well. Approximately the same time as we're moving around, building these stone tools, starting to explore, at the same time as that's happening, Earth is entering its last glaciation period, its last ice age, and so humans are able to like go further than they've ever been able to go at that point. Modern humans, so they're used modern for not us, but for these humans who are migrating at this time. They're moving into colder conditions. They're going to have to adapt pretty quickly, pretty heavily to their new environment, their new situation. So new forms of clothing, made from hides of hunted animals. You also will see development of stone, bone, and wood needles, sewing needles, to be able to sew clothes, to sew the hides together. So some real human ingenuity, right? Many human groups are now going to be exposed to a greater variety of animals than they could use to supplement their diets, because now they're reaching all these new areas that they've never reached before. So they're trying out new sources of food, new sources of meat. A typical group of early humans could be as small as 15 people, and that's going to be your average. Anything larger than 40 is going to be too many people to really sustain themselves on a hunter-gatherer lifestyle. And archaeological remains and cave paintings show that we hunted deer, horses, gazelle, bison, and even woolly mammoths, right? So we're going after everything. For shelter, humans are usually going to either build structures or find natural structures like caves to protect themselves from the elements. And around the world, archaeologists have found evidence suggesting that some populations would stay in a cave for tens of thousands of years. Like that is just where their family would live, and kind of roam out from there and then come back to home base. The Neolithic Revolution. So discuss the Neolithic age, explain the consequences of the Neolithic Revolution, and describe Neolithic settlements around the world and their significance. So the Neolithic age happens about 12,000 years ago. So very far after. We're in the Paleolithic age for a majority of the timeline of prehistory. And then we finally hit the Neolithic age pretty much right before civilization starts. And we don't really know for sure. There are lots of different arguments for it, but eventually what defines the Neolithic age is that on a large scale, humans start spending time in one place. They settle down and start practicing agriculture. We actively promote the growth of crops and later domestication of animals to provide themselves with the resources that they need. This revolution is going to occur independently at different times in several different areas across the entire globe, including the Near East, China, Africa, Mesoamerica, and South America. It happens just kind of randomly in the same 12,000, period of years. But it happens randomly across the globe, different times, different structures, but all kind of basically the same in a time that we do not have global communication. We barely maybe even have communication between groups, right? So it's kind of crazy that for whatever reason, at the same time, humans all kind of make this decision to start staying in one place, to start growing their food, to start raising their animals, rather than doing what they had been doing for millions of years at that point. And so in the Neolithic age, sorry, we have a couple of different regions that really take off and are able to adapt this culture, this agricultural setting far earlier than others. One of the biggest ones, probably one that you're pretty familiar with, is in Mesopotamia, southern Turkey and Israel. It is known as the Fertile Crescent, because it's kind of the crescent of this Mediterranean Sea that's surrounded by desert but has full access to water, lots of fresh water, lots of rivers, right? Um, about 12,000 years ago, people are going to begin domesticating wild grasses, which eventually will become wheat and barley throughout this Fertile Crescent here. Around 10,000 years ago, Asian people living along the Yellow River and the Yangtze River, so everything in between here, are going to start settling down there, kind of similar to the Fertile Crescent, and begin farming crops like rice, millet, and soybeans. In sub-Saharan Africa, yes, this map is French. We're not going to talk about it. In sub-Saharan Africa, around Sudan, and where this is like very, we have lots of water flowing around. We have lots of fertile land. We're going to start actively cultivating sorghum as early as 6,000 years ago. In Mexico, we'll start kind of mainly central Mexico along the Gulf of Mexico, but really kind of widespread as well. Cultivating corn, beans, squash, and peppers. And then the Andean region, so Chile, the Pacific side of the Andes Mountains, we're going to start growing potatoes as a big crop there. So you can see it happens all throughout the major continents of the world, different times, different crops, all following basically the same pattern randomly on their own, independently. And that gives us the Neolithic age. It's a key change that's caused by the agriculture is that humans, rather than their environment, become the deciding factor on what plants will grow. Humans start taking the decision into their own hands. They start transforming the land that they're living on to match their needs and match their wants. Humans are going to be primarily interested in seeds, things that are not hard to eat, that don't take a lot of effort or energy to eat. And so they select wheat and barley with thinner husks, and eventually will evolve these plants into what we know them as today because we did it for thousands of years, right? That's selective breeding. Comparable agricultural societies spend 30 or more hours engaged in farming. So that means that all the civilizations that we just looked at are going to spend about 30 hours a week on farming, which means less time for resting, sharing knowledge, and other activities, less free time than you had as hunter gatherers. Large groups in agricultural communities are also more vulnerable to diseases, something that we have into our modern era as well. And it's also going to collect large amounts of human and animal waste because we're all staying in the same place together at the same time, right? Their reliance on food is also now dependent on the weather as well, because they can't just get up and leave and go find, the place that has the good rain or the place that hasn't had famine or the place that's not too wet, right? They're going to have to rely and kind of start working on the weather. They cannot just easily pick up and leave, right? They're going to have a less diverse diet than hunter gatherers, and they're going to have significantly lower meat consumption than hunter gatherers. So it's a very interesting transition that's happening because, on a lot of accounts, their lives are better now that they have agriculture. But at the same time, about as many good things could be said for the hunter gatherer society. So it's this real true transition period where we're choosing what bad parts we'll live with for the good parts, right? We're actively making that decision in different groups across the globe at the same time. And as early humans left their hunter-gatherer lives behind, they drifted away from egalitarianism and start clearly making defined gender roles in society. People are also going to be able to specialize in a sedentary agricultural lifestyle. Not everyone's farming. There's not enough farmland, right? Some people have become traders, some people become stone workers, making those tools for them. Religion will see a transformation here, not anything kind of organized, but it's more organized than as hunter gatherers. And you'll even start to see kind of a elite class of society with some wealth, right? In agricultural societies, we'll see those clearly defined gender roles start to emerge. Men are working out in the field, women are working in the home with the children, right? And we start to see those kind of become really solidified there. And a number of these Neolithic settlements emerged in Europe, the Near East, China, Pakistan, and beyond. And one of the largest to ever be excavated or found is in southeastern Turkey, and it is known as Çatalhöyük. Houses at Çatalhöyük are made from mud brick and were clustered together with roads or passages between them. They're actually fully encased. You never have to actually leave the inside of your home or the city as you're traveling between these different buildings. Cattle imagery is endless in Çatalhöyük. Bullheads with large horns, bull horns protruding from furniture. And so we know that cattle was really important to these people, whether as a deity, whether as that was their main animal, whatever it was. We know that cattle was clearly in fashion during that time, right? The people in Catalhoyuk are going to live a life that was never fully agricultural nor fully hunter-gatherer. They are going to always consistently have some sort of agriculture going on, but not on a large enough scale. They're too big of a city at this point. So they're going to have that going on as they are also having their hunter-gatherer go around to supplement what they're doing at home in agriculture. They did have domesticated animals like cattle. They grew a variety of domesticated plants like wheat, lentils, and barley. And we're pretty sure they also had evidence of an irrigation system, but they also rely on hunting wild animals for meat and gathering wild edible plants, walnuts, berries, pears, crab apples, right? So they're having a varied diet because they're kind of domesticating and growing their staples, but they're still getting other things out from the hunter-gatherer part of society. In other areas of the world, the shift to agriculture is going to happen pretty similarly, but they're going to transition to agriculture a little bit more permanently than Catalhoyuk does. Even in the Fertile Crescent, Catalhoyuk is kind of its own kind of outlier of things. We're going to start seeing a lot more pottery, a lot more archaeological evidence left behind. Humans make trash. When humans are in a place for a long enough time, they make trash. And so that's what archaeologists look for, is those trash piles to see how long people have been here and where people have been and what was their diet and what did they find important, what did they just throw out, right? Pottery is to them like paper plates are to us. And so we get a lot of evidence from pottery shards through these things. And that'll bring us to the end of lecture two. It's a little bit briefer this time. Definitely read specifically 2.2 in the chapter. And then you can also read the tail end of 2.3 to get a lot more detailed information about the Paleolithic and Neolithic age. I just kind of want to give you kind of Cliff's Notes, top line there. It's a little bit dense, a little bit anthropological, sciencey, but do your best to kind of read through it, get some information there. But today we covered early human evolution and migration, people in the Paleolithic age, and the Neolithic revolution. And that'll be it for us for lecture two. I'll see you guys back here for lecture three.